everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is June the 30th, 2022. I'm Barry Stagner, and I mentioned last week that we were going to give you a little bit of a Louis update, and he's getting tired, and it's bedtime, so I'm going to bring him on so you can have a look at him. Now, remember, we got him at 4.5 pounds 6 weeks ago from yesterday, and for all of you Louis fans out there, and I, again, appreciate all your kind comments on social media. But I wanted you to take a look at this guy 6 weeks after we got him. Here's our little Louis. And we're thinking he's maybe pushing 20 pounds already. And he's just been such a blast to have. And he's a good boy and a lover boy, as you can see. But anyway, this is, we relocated him, or whatever they call it, adopted him, I guess. And he was really, really puny when we got him, but he's eating good and getting big. And look at those feet. This is going to be a big boy, so we love him, and just thought I'd bring you up to date. I get people ask at church about him all the time, so there's your Louis update for the week. And on to the news. I've got a lot of interesting things happening this week, and was kind of sorting through what to really cover. And I know there's a lot of folks out there talking prophecy these days. And, I like to focus on a little bit broader picture than just Israel or just the U.S., and just kind of look at some things that maybe are the smaller spokes on the wheel, but prophetic nonetheless. And our first couple of stories are along that line. And the first comes from the Jewish News Syndicate. And the headline reads, Muslims need to own Quran's message that Israel belongs to the Jews. And I don't know how many Christians are aware of it. I know there's even fewer Muslims that are aware of it, but the Quran actually says that the Jews need to kind of stand up and take their homeland. And they're described as the people of Moses. And there's only one people of Moses in the world, and that's the Jews. And the Quran actually calls Israel the homeland for the descendants of Moses, and they're the people of Moses. So the article actually reads, Muslims need to own the Quran's message and understand that Israel belongs to the Jewish people, at least according to one Pakistani journalist who recently visited the Jewish state. In the Quran, there is a claim, a very strong one, that the Jewish people have their historic homeland. Ahmed Qureshi told Eli Kohanim this week on Global Perspectives. This claim needs to be recognized. Qureshi was recently in Israel on a mission trip to help reconcile relations between Muslims and Jews, and he told Kohanim that the Middle East is on the cusp of solving the Arab-Israeli conflict. We could really be at a beginning of the end of that conflict, said Qureshi. And Qureshi was on a private mission with predominantly Pakistani expats from the U.S., though he lives in Pakistan. When he returned to his country, a former prime minister politicized his trip, and the state fired him from his role at the TV station. But Qureshi said that despite his personal loss, there's a good part. For the first time in 75 years in Pakistan's modern history, we have a very robust, open, and positive debate about making peace with Israel. And President Yitzhak Herzog became a household name. Qureshi met with Herzog on his visit. Qureshi said that now is the time when moderate Muslim countries need to work with Israel to ensure their security from extremists. And we see early signs of the emergence of a new security system in our region, Qureshi claimed. Our second article is along the same lines, and it comes actually from the birthplace of Islam, Saudi Arabia. And the Jerusalem Post reports in its headline, Antisemitism largely eliminated from textbooks in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has seen a trend of improvement in removing anti-Semitism from its curriculum in recent years. And anti-Semitism has largely been eliminated from Saudi textbooks. The Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, or a group called Impact, or a ministry, I should say, called Impact, revealed in its annual report on education in Saudi Arabia. And the report released Monday found that content portraying Jews as disobedient and teachings of anti-Semitic tropes such as Jewish wealth were removed from the Saudi curriculum. Anti-Semitic Quran verses were also removed. And Saudi Arabia has seen a trend of improvement in removing anti-Semitic content from its curriculum in recent years, Impact said. According to the Institute, Quran verses describing Jews as being turned into monkeys were removed, as was the anti-Semitic myth that one of the goals of Zionism is a global Jewish government. In addition, Quran verses prohibiting friendships with Jews and Christians and condemning homosexuality have all been removed in the past 3 years. In 2021, several lessons demonizing Jewish people, Christians, and other non-believers were removed from the curriculum. An entire textbook unit on jihad was taken out of the curriculum. A year prior, a chapter called The Zionist Danger, which dealt with various topics regarding the delegitimization of Israel's right to exist, was removed. The chapter called The Zionist Danger, which dealt with various topics regarding this issue of Israel's right to exist, has also been removed. And anti-Semitism is still a bit of a problem in Saudi Arabia. However, some problematic content remains. According to the report, Israel is still omitted from maps shown in textbook, and Zionism is still described as racist. And Saudi students are falsely taught that Zionists deliberately tried to burn down the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 1969, a lie which was also removed from Qatar's curriculum. A Quran verse comparing Jews to book-carrying donkeys also remains, while students are taught that women are to blame for male sexual harassment, kind of a protective belief of the Islamic view of women and their responsibility to cover themselves for the sake of men. Now, this is interesting because we have these two opening articles that remind us that in the Ezekiel war scenario, it's the Arab Gulf states that are going to protest the invasion of Israel by the nations that are named in that same pair of chapters regarding the coming Ezekiel war, which I believe is on the very near horizon. So here you've got the Saudis now making further movement towards normalization, or maybe even establishing for the first time a civil relationship with the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And, you've got these movements now where you've got this Pakistani Muslim who is saying, we need to read the book. We need to understand what it says. There's no Palestinians and there's no Palestinian territory. There's just the people of Moses who in the Quran have been granted their land as an inheritance forever. So, again, seeing these things happen, seeing them begin to move forward rather interestingly and even aggressively ought to remind us that everything is falling into place. And one of the reasons I like to cover stories like this is because when the little stuff, compared to the rebirth of the nation of Israel, the defection from truth in the church, perilous times coming, the big boys, so to speak, prophetically, when they're all operating, and then the little things, the nuances of the prophetic timetable, so to speak, begin to happen, we need to be paying close attention to the lateness of the hour and the fact that Jesus said in Matthew 24:44, therefore you also be ready, for I am coming at an hour you do not expect. And what that phrase actually means is that at the time of his coming to meet the church in the air, that is, it will be a season on the earth of low expectation and knowledge and understanding of Jesus and the promises of his return, that glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, the Times of Israel is reporting that Iran has reportedly arrested an Iranian Republican Guard general on charges of spying for Israel. And I have to say, I was reading through Amir's new book that isn't out yet, and I had to text him, and there's one part in there where the story was just beyond belief of something that happened in Iran. And the book is fictional, but it's covers a lot of stuff that actually happened. There's one thing in particular I asked him, did that really happen? Is that true? And he said, absolutely. And it was having to do with what we're talking about right here, people on the inside in Iran helping Israel combat their sworn adversary, sworn on Iran's part, that is. And let me just pause for a moment again. And we need to remember that the Iranian people and the Iranian government are two different things. I would encourage you, go back and look at a YouTube video and just type in Iran pre-1979. And it's like looking at LA or New York or one of the big cities where everything is contemporary and on the edge and cutting edge as far as fashion and those kind of things. And Iran was right there before the Islamic Revolution. And now here we see them in this backwards condition where the people and the government are two separate entities and not really reflecting one reflecting the other. A senior general in Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps was secretly arrested earlier this month for allegedly spying for Israel, according to a report published on Wednesday by the New York Times. Citing officials with close ties to the IRGC, speaking on condition of anonymity, the report said the arrest of Brigadier General Ali Naziri marked a growing level of distrust among the country's senior leadership, partly attributed to Israel's alleged recent operations in the country. And Nasiri served as a senior commander in the IRGC Protection of Information Unit, according to the Times. His arrest, came about 2 months after a few dozen security officials involved in Iran's missile program were arrested for allegedly leaking classified information to Israel, the report said. Reportedly arrested sometime in early June, the series arrest came shortly before the replacement of the IRGC's intelligence chief Hossein Taib. Taib, who held the position for more than 12 years, has been tasked with exposing Israel's spy network in Iran, and an unnamed advisor to the Iranian government and an individual affiliated with the IRGC both told the Times. And Taib's downfall is seen by some as a prime example of the long-running campaign by Israel to expose failures by the Republican Guard by allegedly stepping up attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities in recent months and targeting high-level officials inside Iranian territory. And of course, these things are usually motivation on Iran's part to do something, usually in Syria or something that isn't directly an attack on Israeli soil, but will possibly some type of cyber attack. And we'll have to watch and see what stems from this revelation that there's a supposed spy that's been arrested. Now, Erud Sheva has an article, the Israeli National News, that has a headline that reads along the same lines of our last story, that the Iranian security establishment shaken by Israeli breaches. Former Iranian VP says a string of Israeli operations in Iran have rattled the country's security establishment, as we just read, leading to the firing of the intel chief. A series of recent incidents inside Iran attributed to Israeli agents has significantly undermined the Iranian security establishment's confidence in its own intelligence operations and led to the recent shakeup in leadership, an Iranian cleric and former vice president said. According to the previous report of the New York Times, the replacement of Hossein Taib, the head of the intelligence unit of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps last week, was a direct result of Israeli security operations in Iran, along with the failure of Iranian plots abroad. We know there's been multiple plots that have been foiled in Turkey to assassinate Israeli citizens who are vacationing there, even as the Turkish government and the Israelis are trying to normalize some type of relationship again that has been very strained over the past 12 to 15 years, basically since Tayyip Erdogan took power and wants to establish or reestablish the Ottoman Empire, over which, of course, he will be Sultan. And again, there's been efforts by the Iranians to assassinate Israeli citizens. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the responses, the retaliation actions are usually somewhere outside of Israel, because I think the Iranians well understand that Israel has an advantage over them militarily, but I would also remind all of us that Israel has another advantage over them, and that is that God brought them back into their homeland through supernatural means, is drawing them from all over the world, and has said through the prophet Amos that when they're back in the land, they will not be uprooted ever again. And the fact that God has given it to them as an everlasting covenant to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it's their land forever. So while we watch these things and these attempts and these threats to eliminate the Jewish people and drive them from the national homeland, what we do know for sure is it ain't going to work. it will never happen. The Lord is protecting them. And I do believe even giving them insight into what areas they can infiltrate in Iranian intelligence and elsewhere as well. The Jewish News Syndicate is reporting that Iran and the U.S. resume indirect nuclear talks in Qatar. Iran's chief nuclear negotiator Ali Bagheri Khani and U.S. Special Envoy for Iran Robert Malley are negotiating from separate rooms in a Doha hotel. Yeah, that's mature. Indirect nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran resumed Tuesday in Doha, Qatar. Iranian state media reported, and Iran's chief nuclear negotiator, Ali Bagheri Khani, and U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Malley, are negotiating from separate rooms in the Doha hotel, according to Reuters. And the talks aim to revive the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran, the U.S., and other world powers. And Khani met with European Union envoy Enrique Mora, who is shuttling between the two sides, and Iran refuses to hold direct talks. Now, again, I think this is a sad state of affairs representing the United States. And let me just say something here. The Genesis 12:3 gives a promise that the Lord said that he will bless those who bless Abraham and curse those who curse them. And speaking of the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, later after the promise of Genesis 12:3, we find that it's those of the circumcision that are being referred to as the possessors of the eternal and everlasting covenant with the land and the God of Abraham and Isaac. And, recognizing this, a lot of people say, well, that's kind of outdated and antiquated, and it's really been fulfilled. And, God has cast his people aside temporarily and now brought them back into the land. Or others would argue that God just cast them off forever, which would violate numerous scriptures, I should say. But, people say, well, we really can't apply that to modern Israel. Well, the fact is, Abraham was told, in you, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That's a messianic promise. Well, if that part of the promise is still true, and people are getting saved all over the world is still true, and they're getting saved only and exclusively through Jesus Christ, then Genesis 12:3, all of it is still true. And we, I think, here in the States need to be praying for those in places of power, as there's a very different attitude between this president and the previous one regarding the nation of Israel, and why in the world we're sitting down at the table with people who are bent on Israel's destruction and have publicly stated so, have been caught lying time and again, have kicked out the nuclear inspectors, have gone underground with their centrifuges and the enrichment of uranium, and over and over again have proven themselves to be untrustworthy, and yet the U.S. wants to sit down with them again at the negotiating table and get back into a plan that was disastrous in the first place. Now, we have to remember the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of 2015 simply stated that Iran would not have a nuclear weapon within 10 years. Well, it's been 7 years. So now, basically, getting back to the table, that would be, and getting back under the plan, that would say that you won't have a nuclear weapon for another 3 years. Now, what good is that? That's just stupidity. And I think as Christians, we need to recognize this is evil. This is spiritual darkness. And, to just take this position after the wonderful things we saw happen between the U.S. and Iran. And now, what are we seeing? We're turning our back on Israel, standing against the East Med pipeline, standing against developments in Judea and Samaria, or what's called by the media the West Bank today, and basically threatening Israel and, about further developments and settlements and all of these things. And what are we seeing in our country? Are we being blessed right now? We just came out of record unemployment, gas prices that are pushing $4 a gallon, cheaper than they are right now. I'd say this is an important issue, and we need to be praying for our country. And actually, I'm going to do a message, and I would never ask anybody to abandon their home church and not be a part of the church family that they have. But after the fact, if you'd like to catch it on YouTube or join us online Sunday morning after you attending your church, I'm going to do a message on Sunday called America, Once Beautiful. And we're going to talk about some of the things going on in our country. And don't let the title throw you. I love our country. And I'm passionate for our country. I am a patriot through and through, and don't want to see this country go down the tubes. And, there's some things that we have done to contribute to our own demise. Many of them that parallel what happened to the Roman Empire that was never conquered from without. It simply imploded from within. And the breakdown of the home, the disrespect for religion, in Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he cited the fact that there was free food and wine for the masses and circuses for the people, and people just watching more and more violent sports and calling it entertainment. And boy, if we're not following that path, I don't know what to say. But that is contributing to why we're seeing America unravel at the seams. And yet, our founding fathers established this great country on the principles of Scripture. And we're going to talk about some of those things. So, again, not trying to draw you away from your own church, but I think you'd be encouraged by the message we're going to talk about on Sunday. America, Once Beautiful. Now, the Epoch Times is reporting that the U.S. is ramping up military posture in Europe with permanent military base in Poland. The U.S. will create, and remember, Russia has said, don't you dare set anything up in Poland. The United States will create a new permanent Army headquarters in Poland and deploy additional land, air, and sea forces across the length and breadth of Europe in response to threats from the Russian president, Biden said on Wednesday. I'm announcing the United States will enhance our force posture in Europe and respond to the changed security environment, as well as strengthening our collective security, he told reporters during a briefing. He was joined by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Madrid, Spain. And we're going to continue to adjust our posture based on the threat in close consultations with our allies, he added. And the Biden administration said that the U.S. will take several additional actions, including some deployments already announced after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Almost double the number of U.S. Navy destroyers stationed in Spain's Rota naval base. The number will reach 4 to 6 once this deployment is completed. Additional 20,000 additional U.S. forces will go to Europe and bring the total U.S. military personnel in Europe to 100,000. They will position a rotational brigade combat team in Romania and will add 3,000 fighters and another 2,000 personnel. Send 2 additional squadrons of advanced F-35 fighter jets to Britain. Add 625 troops in Germany to oversee and carry out air defense artillery operations, combat sustainment support, and engineering missions, and station a short-range air defense battery in Italy, adding 65 personnel. And the story goes on and on and on. But again, we have to wonder, and there's been stories and reports about from people close to the source that are saying things are getting so weird in Russia that Putin better sleep with one eye open, because there's a good possibility one of his own staff is going to take him out, because he has aspirations that are far beyond Ukraine and looking at a return to the glory days of Mother Russia, much like Erdogan is looking for the return of the Ottoman Empire, much like the Ayatollah Khomeini is looking for a global caliphate with Shia Islam in charge. Now, the Gateway Pundit is reporting that Biden's America, from Trump energy independence to record high gas prices to buying oil from Iran. That's right, buying oil from Iran and Venezuela. Under President Trump, America was energy independent. Now insanity and evil are running the White House, and Biden is entertaining buying oil from terrorist nation Iran and communist nation Venezuela. President Trump wanted America to be energy dominant, and it was. Economist Steve Moore says Biden's energy pipe dream will bankrupt the USA. President Trump's economist Steve Moore discussed Biden's energy fantasies and the contrast with President Trump's energy policy. Newsmax said Joe Biden's unwinding of American energy independence under the Trump administration will ultimately bankrupt the country, according to Trump economic advisor Stephen Moore. I don't want America to be energy independent. I want America to be energy dominant, Trump said to his economist. And President Trump did what he said he would, and America became energy independent. America under Trump was producing more energy than it needed. America was selling oil and no longer importing oil. As a result, by mid-2017, gas prices were low, and inflation, get it, was at 1%. Biden came with his energy killing policies, the article goes on to say, and now we have what we're all experiencing today. And, it's interesting to see some comments from some of the faces that are always on the news talking about, they're not worried about this because they drive a Tesla. Well, there's not a whole lot of people that can afford a Tesla, and Teslas are, not cheap like a small economy car that costs you $15,000, $20,000 or $30,000 on a high end of an inexpensive car, and people just don't have that kind of money. A lot of people are still buying, the majority of people are still buying used cars, and to say something so crass, so arrogant, simply again indicates what a mess we have at the power top of our country, and people in high places just being so detached from reality that they would say just idiotic things like that. "Oh, I'm not worried. I drive a Tesla." Now, Biden, according to Breitbart, says Biden's Pentagon is facing historic military recruitment shortfalls and facing a perfect storm of events. The Biden Pentagon is falling far short of its military recruitment goals, prompting frequent high level meetings on the issue and the consideration of dropping some of its 250 disqualifiers for military service, according to a recent report from NBC News. According to the report, the Pentagon may overlook certain medical conditions such as asthma and ADHD and put more effort into recruiting illegal immigrants who were brought into the U.S. as young children. Now, again, you open the door wider. That's how you get more people in the military, not make it more attractive and not do what the military is supposed to do. And it's not exactly clear how bad the problem is for every branch, but the Army, the military's largest branch, is facing historic struggles, the article says. It has met only about 40% of its enlisted recruiting mission for the fiscal year of 2022, which ends in 3 months on September 30th. In hopes of meeting its goal, the Army last week announced it is dropping its requirement for recruits to have a high school diploma or GED certificate if they can ship the basic training by October 1st, according to military.com. In March, the Army announced it was reducing its size due to recruiting difficulties, and that's the first time that has ever happened. And Senate Armed Services Committee ranking member Jim Inhofe, a Republican from Oklahoma, called it more serious than any recruiting challenge that I've experienced in the years that I've been here. Defense and military officials publicly blame a tight job market and a lack of access to high schools during the COVID lockdowns, but an internal DoD survey shows the military has a messaging problem. An internal DoD survey obtained by NBC News found that only 9% of young Americans eligible to serve in the military had any inclination to do so, the lowest number since 2007. In addition, more than half of the young Americans surveyed believed that they would have emotional or psychological problems after serving in the military, and nearly half think they would have physical problems. One Army recruiting station commander who wished to speak anonymously noted that there is currently no national call to service. National pride is at an all-time low, and this generation has grown up in an era that sees the nation's history constantly scrutinized and no longer celebrated. Heritage Foundation expert and retired General Thomas Spohr believes that there is a waning propensity for public service. Over time, American society has placed less and less value on the idea of public service, he told Breitbart in an interview regarding the Army's recruiting difficulties. Both cited the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years, which the world watched unfold on live television, often in horror. The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has also caused some to question our military and their competence. The Afghanistan withdrawal failure played out live at times, and people watched. Why would I want to be a part of that? The Army recruiting station commander said. Both also cited the perception that wokeism is growing in the military. And there's a sense among the American public that the military is becoming increasingly political, and that topics such as race and gender equality, critical race theory, wokeism in general are commanding more attention at the cost of readiness. And the media and to the extent the military have embraced and pushed the left-wing narrative on a variety of issues. And the riots of 2020 further demonized American history as well as the South, the area that traditionally supplies the most members of the military. Now, again, pointing your mind back to America is not a Bible prophecy. Something is going to happen to America. America could be on the road to implosion or external forces coming in. And now we can't get people to join the military because the military has gone woke. And really, that's the heart of the story. And we've all heard, the Pentagon taking positions on matter of what schools teach and, these social issues. And that's not what the military is for. The military is not there to have an opinion. The military is there to defend the United States of America and its citizens. That's its sole responsibility. And I think we need to remember that Romans 13 is very clear about the role and responsibility of people in places of power. That is to punish evil and protect innocent people from evil people. And yet today, what have we got? We've got an agenda-based Pentagon and many of those in places of power contributing to the efforts to basically overthrow the last president and his time in office. And, you've got these people violating the very oath they raised their hand to keep. And, it's interesting to think about what we're going to talk about a little bit on Sunday, and that is what the founders established and how every person who takes the oath of office today swears to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and yet they don't. And part of the problem is that nothing happens to them like it used to. It used to be you were called a traitor. It used to be you'd be at the least fired from your position, but today it just seems to be, that you have that opinion and you have that right to. Not in political office, you don't. You have the right and responsibility only to hold up the U.S. Constitution, not promote wokeism, social justice, or anything else. And that's why the military is having a problem. Another reason cited was that over 40% of 18 to 24-year-old men have refused the vaccine. So they're not eligible to join the military. So talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. And, I've seen this happen. I'm getting ready to head to next week. We're going to wrap up the program for about 3 weeks. And I'm going to be headed to South Africa with the mayor and Pastor Michael Lay and do a prophecy teaching tour over there. And I actually had to change, my flight that I just bought several months ago, and had to change it for a different airline because the airline who laid off all unvaccinated pilots and cabin help, and now they can't put planes in the air. And they changed my flight and messed it all up and messed up my schedule. So I had to cancel it and go with somebody else. And, we're seeing this now happening in the military too. And it's just ridiculous, the things going on. But the Lord said it'd be a mess. Up would be down, down, up, evil, good, good, evil. Thoughts and intents of man's heart, only evil, continually, violence filling the earth. We're seeing all these things happen. And now we've got as I said, the little pieces coming together. The Saudis are removing anti-Semitic materials from school curriculums. A Pakistani man calling for Muslims to recognize what the Quran actually says. And, all these things pointing to Israel becoming the focal point of world attention as they will be in the last days. And we have to remember that the tribulation period is the 70th week of Daniel. And for me, that's one of the biggest arguments for the pre-tribulation rapture. The church wasn't here for the other 69 weeks, so why would we be here for the 70th? We're not going to be here because it's a time that God deals exclusively with the nation of Israel, the finalizing of their discipline, and also bringing 1/3 of them to a place where they look upon the one whom they pierced and they mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. That's an act of repentance, by the way. And these Jews will be saved. And interesting to see all the things going on that the Bible has foretold. Now, the Wall Street Journal also reports, as we just mentioned, the world being filled with violence. After the leaked threats of violence reach more public officials is a headline. And after the leaked Supreme Court opinion on Roe v. Wade, Attorney General Merrick Garland said the U.S. Marshals would provide round-the-clock security at the justice's home. As an elected official, and longtime advocate for gay rights, California's State Senator Scott Wiener is accustomed to facing criticism, but in the past few years, his work life has taken on a more menacing quality. Threats and online attacks calling him a pedophile have become a daily occurrence for the San Francisco Democrat, and he's a messed up dude for sure. Earlier this month, he received an email saying bombs had been left at his home and office, and police investigated and no explosives were found. And Wiener says he now worries that online aggressors may turn their words into actions. And he and other lawmakers sometimes receive police escorts around the California state capitol. I've got thousands of death threats in the past years, Wiener said. I'm a Jewish gay man, and I've done some very aggressive work for the LGBTQ and HIV communities, and they come at me hard because of that work. Public figures across the U.S. are facing escalating harassment and threats of violence at a time of deep political divisions and coarsened public debate. They say an undercurrent of anxiety courses through their work lives and often spills into their personal lives, and some are resigning as a result, while others are receiving enhanced security. And those affected include high-profile figures such as Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was targeted earlier this month by an armed man who said he planned to kill him. And Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer also faced an alleged kidnap plot 2 years ago. And increasingly, the threats involve less prominent officials, such as local election supervisors and school board members. Our public officials ran because they wanted to make their communities better, said Clarence Anthony, chief executive of the National League of Cities. We're finding a lot of them saying, well, I didn't sign up for this. And this is actually something I'm going to talk about in one of my messages in South Africa, and that is what opens the door, at least in part, for the Antichrist, is a complete dissatisfaction with all forms of government that are currently in place on the earth. You go around the world and everybody's unhappy with their government. And we've seen during the pandemic, we've seen things happening in Australia and France and Italy and Germany, and people all over out in the streets protesting that which their government is forcing upon them. And, sadly, because these people are not regenerate, or they don't have the Holy Spirit, as 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, they can't understand the things of God because they're spiritual and they're spiritually dead. Unregenerate, I think, would be the proper term again. But, looking at this, they're really kind of jumping from the frying pan into the fire with the guy they're going to get, and unknowingly, but they will side with him. There's no question about it. Revelation 13 says that the whole world will go after the beast. Now, the New York Post reports the feds say you must be vaxxed, but we don't have to be. The Supreme Court ruled that Medicaid and Medicare can continue to require the employees of healthcare providers that they certify that they are vaccinated. Well, who watches the watchers? And when it comes to the vaccination status of federal government's vaccine cops, it turns out no one. In January, a 5-4 Supreme Court decision ruled that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services could continue requiring that the healthcare providers and suppliers it's certified to ensure their staff, including employees, volunteers, and anyone else providing care, are vaccinated against COVID-19 if they want to remain eligible for federal funding. Initially, the surveyors who oversee compliance with this mandate were also required to be vaccinated, but in a June 16 memo, CMS simply gave them a pass. This guidance does not include any possibilities of penalties for noncompliance, said the federal government prohibits facilities from inquiring about surveyor vaccination status. Can you believe it? It's how crooked can you get? And really, I think that's the story of the day as far as it relates to governments around the world, as we had mentioned a moment ago. Now, here's another reason why there's such distrust today. The Daily Caller reports that the CDC was caught using false data to recommend kids take the COVID vaccines. The CDC showcased highly misleading data about the risk of COVID-19 to kids when its expert vaccine advisors voted to recommend vaccines for children under 5 years old. The agency featured a preprint study ranking causes of death in children when it presented its data to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices earlier in the month, after which the committee voted to recommend kids aged 6 months through 4 years get vaccinated for COVID-19. The study claimed to show that COVID-19 was a leading cause of death for children in the United States during the pandemic, but observers quickly pointed out major flaws in the data, which rendered it misleading. The paper ranks COVID-19 as the top 6 cause of death for age brackets from 0 to 19, including under 1-year-old, 1 to 4-year-olds, 5 to 9-year-olds, 10 to 14-year-olds, and 15 to 19-year-olds. And it's unclear why the authors include 18 and 19-year-olds in pediatric data, since they're adults. A majority of the researchers involved in the paper are from the UK, where the age of majority is 18 in most jurisdictions. However, one misleading aspect of the paper, as first pointed out by COVIDgeorgia.com, is that it ranks cumulative COVID-19 deaths alongside annual rates for other causes of death. For instance, in the age bracket of 1 to 4, the group ranks cumulative COVID-19 deaths as the 5th leading cause of death, ahead of heart disease and influenza. But further down the list, it ranks annual COVID-19 deaths as 8th, conflicting evidence in the same report. For every single age group, the cumulative COVID-19 death rate is more than double the annualized death rate. Another big issue with the CDC data presentation is the conflation of deaths caused directly by COVID-19 versus those for which COVID-19 was simply a contributing factor, meaning those who had comorbidities. Excuse me. The authors state we only consider COVID-19 as an underlying and not contributing cause of death, but that is false. And then the article goes on to say that gives the actual accidents are about 25 times more likely to kill an infant than COVID-19, as is murder, very sadly. And for kids under a year old, it ranks actually 9th behind influenza, pneumonia, heart disease, and sadly, again, homicide. So again, the twisting of information for the sake of selling vaccines at astronomical prices to the U.S. government is being promoted by the U.S. government. So you have to wonder what's all behind this. Now, I think we all know corruption is all behind it. Now, Breitbart reports another sad story of just how upside down our world has gotten, and the ridiculous things that are happening in our world that are just ruining people's lives, and especially women. And, here we're living in an age where people in high office, we just had a Supreme Court nominee who has been approved by the Senate and who will take office in October, who said they don't know what a woman is. They can't define what a woman is, and this person is a woman. And yet here we have all these cries now going out for women's right to choose. Well, if you don't know what a woman is, then how do you know what the woman's right to choose is? Again, just the thinking today is exactly what Romans chapter 1 says. God has given many people over to debased minds to do what is unfitting. And this is the loss of natural affection. And, a lot of people talking about, the overturning of Roe v. Wade going to drive women to the old coat hanger story and all those things, or other, life-threatening things. And, I see these people who are just adamant that what a grievous injustice has happened from the Supreme Court. When the matter, again, as I did on a little update, it was a legal decision. It wasn't a moral decision. The federal government overstepped its bounds in 1973. They don't have the right to tell states that they must do this. The states have more power than the Fed, and each state has, under the Constitution, the right to make their own decision on this issue. And yet it's presented in this heinous light that the Supreme Court, I even saw an article where someone suggested that the Supreme Court has seen its day. And these are the same people, when there were decisions being made about national health care, who were saying, hey, we have to listen to the Supreme Court. We have to do what they say. I mean, they're the gold standard, so to speak, in this country as far as interpreting law. And now, well, maybe we need to get rid of them because, they're making decisions that we don't like, and blaming the Trump appointees for it. But listen to this story. Breitbart again. Trans skateboarder who took first place from a 13-year-old girl is a former Navy man and father of 3. A 29-year-old transgender skateboarder who beat teenage girls at a New York City's women's competition this past weekend is actually a former Navy man who was rejected for the Olympics for his high testosterone levels. Over the weekend, Riki Trez, who also goes by the name Riki and Trez, beat 13-year-old skateboarder Shiloh Katori at the border skating contest in New York City. Though the competition was open to all ages, the heats and finals were segregated by gender. And while Shiloh appeared to support Riki competing, female skateboarder Taylor Silverman expressed outrage on social media. According to the Daily Mail, Riki was previously rejected from Women's Street USA Skateboarding National Championships in a bid to qualify for the Olympics for having high testosterone levels. Riki also fathered 3 children in his previous marriage. I'm 28. I have 3 kids. I'm married. I did my time in the military. I own a company. I've decided that I like being pretty and cute, Riki previously said. So everything that goes with that is female. I love female bodies. I think it's a work of art. I know I will never be a woman because women are miraculous. They have babies and create life and do all that awesome stuff. I'll never have that ability, but I feel like I am a woman. Riki added, I would have wished to be born one, so I'll try to fill that image as much as I can for myself, and that pretty much involves being as cute as can be. In another interview, Riki USA Skateboarding's Robert Brink said that transgender athletes should not have to take hormones to qualify. You can't ask an elite professional athlete to compromise their health. Besides the fact that I've explained transitioning as a sense of enlightenment and has nothing to do with your testosterone level. It's a matter of decision and your feelings. Whether you're a boy or a girl is a matter of decision and your feelings, and you finally decided to be you. Now, if you are what you think, why do you need to have surgery to become what you think you are? It just doesn't make any sense. And these gender reassignment surgeries and all that just prove the fact that you're not what you think you are. And if you're a male and you think you're a female, no, you're a male, period. And, where are the women's rights groups on this kind of thing? And again, up is down, down is up. And Isaiah 5:20 is happening right before our eyes today. Evil is called good. Good is called evil. Now, as we move to the end of our time together, it's good to see God directing the Jews and giving them wisdom to use their resources around them, which would include the Mediterranean, for their benefit and the sustenance of their people and land. And Israel is going to be the first country in the world to pipe desalinated water into a natural lake, the Sea of Galilee. Early next year, Israel is set to become the first country in the world to channel desalinated water into a natural lake, that being the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias. One of the lowest lying bodies of water on Earth, and the Sea of Galilee is Israel's largest freshwater lake and its emergency water store. The national water company, Mekorot, plans to complete a construction of a 13-kilometer or 8-mile underground pipe by the end of this year, to be followed by weeks of tests before it goes into operation around the end of the first quarter in 2023. The pipe will connect the lake to infrastructure that in turn links into 5 desalination plants on the Mediterranean coast. The water will enter the lake via the Zalman Stream, which drains into the Sea of Galilee near Kibbutz Gislar on the northwestern shore. Tests carried out by scientists indicate that the project will not have any significant deleterious effect on ecosystems and will even help them by keeping water level stable. Now, I'll remind you, the State of California Water Commission just rejected a bid to build in Southern California in the city of Carlsbad a desalination plant because of the ecological consequences. Well, Israel just said there is no significant deleterious effect on ecosystems. But here in California, Seems like the loony birds continue to rule. Now, Breitbart says White House promotes website advising children about hiding abortion from parents. The White House responded to the Supreme Court overturning of Roe v. Wade by promoting a website advising children how to hide their abortions from their parents. If you need information on your state's laws or legal help, you may consider this website. AbortionFinder.org, the Department of Health and Human Services advised in a published release to the press that was also promoted by the White House. The website informs children 15 years old or younger that parental requirement laws demand that parents and guardians must be involved with the decision to have an abortion. If you need to avoid having a parent or guardian, contact the If, When, How Judicial Bypass Helpline for information about getting a judicial bypass, the website advises. The website was recently assembled by abortion supporters to simplify the process for people to get abortions. Remember what I said about the implosion of the Roman Empire, the breakdown of the home? And here the government is intruding upon the home and the parent-child relationship and teaching the children. The government is teaching the children how to sneak behind their parents' back and do something and have a major medical procedure. This isn't getting your ears pierced, which if you're under 18, you have to have parental consent. The school nurse can't even give your kid an aspirin. Our middle granddaughter is a type 1 diabetic. And, everything is so monitored and governed. But because it promotes their agenda, they'll sneak your kid off a campus and kill the baby that's inside of her and not tell your parents and tell you how to get away with it. And this is what our government is doing. And boy, I would remind those in places of power of the Lord's attitude towards causing people to stumble. It's better that a millstone be hung around their neck and they be cast in the sea than do the things that they are doing. And again, this just reminds us of the long suffering of God. He is so patient and unwilling that any should perish. And absolutely, we know this grieves his heart, as he has said in the past. The child sacrifice was not something that ever even entered into his mind, and nor does he desire it. And here we have, basically, that's what's going on. These are children who are being sacrificed to the devil, in essence, because that's where abortion comes from. And listen, if you're a born-again believer, God, the Holy Spirit, is never going to lead you to be pro-choice. Never. The Holy Spirit, let me say that again, the Holy Spirit will never lead you to be pro-choice. God is strictly and exclusively pro-life. He is the author and beginner of all life, and he forms us and fashioned us initially into his own image. The Hill says Democrats unveiling the Transgender Bill of Rights. A group of House Democrats on Tuesday announced they would move to codify federal protections for transgender people. Listen, they have the same protections that every other citizen has. Why should you get special protection for a personal preference or choice? Didn't we just read that this is a feelings-based decision? Now, why would you need federal protection for a feelings-based decision? The proposal, dubbed the Transgender Bill of Rights, would codify the Supreme Court's 2020 Bostick versus Clayton County decision that protects employees against discrimination for being gay or transgender. The proposal would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to explicitly include protections for gender identity and sex characteristics, expand to gender-affirming care, and ban conversion therapy. It would also require the attorney ban conversion therapy. Now, they will allow you to get major surgery, life-threatening surgery. People die during surgery all the time. But you can do that, but you can't do the other way and change your mind about your particular status, biological status. It would require that the Attorney General designate a liaison dedicated to overseeing enforcement of civil rights for transgender people and invest in community services to prevent anti-transgender violence. Now, again, as we read earlier, this is a choice. It is based on feeling and personal preference. And what an insult this is to the Black community who fought and shed their blood to have equal civil rights in this country. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has nothing to do with sexual preference. It has everything to do with segregation and favoritism based on skin color, which is not a choice. and it's not based on feelings. And yet, here we are in this ridiculous situation where we have this transgender Bill of Rights being presented by the Democrats. Well, the world has lost its mind, and it's happening all over the world. And things are spiraling downward spiritually and morally and all the other areas that we've been talking about, while nations that are going to protest the invasion of Israel are making agreements with the nation of Israel, cleaning up their own curriculum in their schools to eliminate the negative perspective about Israel. And again, we have to remember that the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. And Hagar, the handmaiden of Sarah, was promised that the Lord would make great nations out of the descendants of Ishmael. And remember, Ishmael means God hears. And she, Hagar, that is, cried out to the Lord when she was put out by Abraham. And the Lord said to do so. And yet the Lord heard her and her cry. And thus her son is named Ishmael. Now, there's been odds between these half brothers for centuries and millennium, even we know. But, again, consider the fact that during the millennial reign of Christ, there'll be one shared language between the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and Israel. And God calls them all in Isaiah 29 his people. So things are changing. There's no question about it. And it is a radically exciting time to be alive. And we need to be about the Father's business, which is telling people about Jesus, leading them to Christ. And we've got a little more time. I'm actually going to fly out on the 12th. We have our first conference in South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, on July 16th and July 23rd. We're going to be in Durban, South Africa. And then July 30th, we're going to be in Pretoria, South Africa. And we've got a bunch of stops in between. I think we've got 14 stops altogether in 14 days. So it's going to be a very busy trip. So, and in the midst of all that, I still got stuff to do at home, and got a book coming out here pretty soon, early next year, that Amir and I co-authored together, that I got to do the final proofread before I leave, and the normal Sunday messages that I prepare, and the lineup next week. So please be in prayer. I appreciate and covet your prayers that everything gets done. And it always does. I don't know how, but God does his thing and things get done, and everything will be ready on time. But anyway, Lord bless you, and good to be with you again this week. And boy, things are happening quickly, and all of them are happening. The motor's running on all cylinders, so to speak. So maybe I won't see you next week, but what I do know is I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.